Good morning. Oh, wait, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Alan.
How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you. So I got the message that this meeting is set to be recorded and transcribed automatically. So let's see if it happens at 3.
Oh, good, because I had a good dad joke, which I will not repeat because it's being recorded.
Okay. Actually, I do think it's being recorded right now, so good idea.
It is being recorded right
but
now.
Feel free to share with me any other time.
Well, it was a riff on a meeting I went to, but I was it was just a query that I had that I turned into a joke. But the query was, well, now that COVID is over, is business casual when you go into a business meeting? Is business casual pre-COVID or is it post-COVID? So the question is, designer pants or designer sweats?
That's a good one.
And that was because I was looking at just how, in certain places, dress pants have become less and less expensive, while sweatpants seem to have gotten more and more expensive.
Have they?
Oh,
interesting.
Yes, this is how my mind works. I'm sorry.
No, that makes a lot of sense, though. Note to self: go buy dress pants.
I guess.
Hi, Brian.
Good afternoon.
So we've received a lot of requests for this meeting invitation. So let's see how many folks actually show up.
Or how many folks watch on YouTube later.
Right.
Now that Amy's here and she can record and cross fingers, it will record.
It appears to be recording right now. And I do have the message this meeting was set to be recorded and transcribed automatically. So.
Hi, Michael Noe. Long time no see.
Hi, Tiffany. How are you?
I'm good. Welcome to PMUG.
Yes, welcome.
Thank you.
Okay, looks like
it was perfect timing for me. I had just the day before told one of my coworkers that we need to figure out how to close out some of our projects. So like perfect timing.
I think we had around 58 people at the last meeting live.
Let's see if we beat that today.
That's my goal. Trying to figure out why some people end up in the lobby and others don't.
I'm not sure either.
Could be an agency thing, maybe. I don't know.
Different tenants and how they are connected through Microsoft.
Yeah. Leave it to the IT professional.
Oh, whoa. Let's go that far. I've only been in IT for 20 years. 20-some years. I don't think that qualifies me as professional.
Well, according to that standard, I'm a novice.
Okay, we're at 3 o'clock. Let's see. I think folks are still joining. We'll give it another minute before we get started.
I'm going to turn off my camera because my internet has been spotty a bit.
I will be off camera too after I do my intro spiel.
Can I go off camera?
No, you're the only one who's required to stay on camera. Just a special bonus for presenters. Although I'm sure your presentation will take up room.
I'm going to mute all.
Okay.
Well,
I think you'll have to unmute yourself, Brian
He did.
and Amy.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. It appears that we are already recording the meeting. Hello and good afternoon. On behalf of the Oregon Project Management Advisory Board, welcome to the Project Management User Group presentation of the month. My name is Amy Croucher and I will be facilitating our meeting today. We'd like to start with a few housekeeping items. As I just mentioned, the meeting is being recorded, so please mute your phone or PC if not speaking. Please mute your microphones or cameras when not speaking, and to help reduce background noise. If you're not speaking, you are encouraged to remain off camera. If you have any questions, raise your hands or place questions in the chat and Bryant will answer them throughout the presentation. Katie, could you go off camera, please? Thank you. Okay, as I said, if you have any questions, please raise your hand. Bryant will answer them throughout the presentation. Also, if you're interested in business analyst processes, the Business Analyst Networking Group meets the third Wednesday during the months in which PMUG does not meet. For information, visit the BANG website, and I will post that in the chat. And you can visit that website by selecting the link in the chat. As I mentioned, again, the meeting is being recorded and a link to the meeting resources will be shared shortly after today's session and posted on the DAS YouTube site. You're welcome to share with your colleagues and encouraged to spread the word on our PMUG Wednesday sessions. I am pleased to host this session presented by Bryant Lister, who will present on the OHA Race, Ethnicity, Language, and Disability and Sexual Orientation and Gender Identity Project. Bryant is a strategic and forward-thinking IT director at the Oregon Health Authority, where he has led the Health and Service Equity Transformation Program since June of 2022. The portfolio of projects for RealD SOGI ensures the alignment of initiatives with legislative requirements, specifically House Bill 3159, and effectively collaborates with a range of stakeholders from top executives to community partners. Prior to his role, Bryant served as the IT Director of Information Security and Privacy Office at OHA from 2019 to 2022, where he was responsible for information security and privacy risk management and compliance. He has also held the roles of OIS Manager of Strategic Initiatives and IT Development Manager and Senior IT Project Manager at OHA. Bryant's education background includes a Doctor of Chiropractic from the University of Western States and a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry from University of California, Riverside. He is also a certified professional with credentials such as CISSP, CSSP, CCSP, PMP, and ITIL Foundation. And he has a certificate in public management with Willamette University, reflecting his commitment to continual learning and professional development. So without further ado, go ahead, Bryant.
Thank you. Thank you for that warm introduction. Let me go ahead and share the presentation. And one thing you'll notice is there's another set of little acronyms next to my name. I did just do the Certified Data Management Professional exam and passed that. So I've got that additional certification. So really proud of that. It's a fun endeavor to learn DEMBOK, all the data management book of knowledge. So like was said, I currently work for the Oregon Health Authority, but I'm in IT, so we're a shared service with the Oregon Department of Human Services. And the RealD SOGI effort does span work in both agencies, so you'll hear me talk about both of those agencies as we go through this. Now, I'm not an equity and inclusion expert, We have a whole team dedicated to that work at the Oregon Health Authority. They're the Equity and Inclusion Division. So they're great people to talk to. If you're in those agencies and you need people to talk to about equity and inclusion or any of these topics, they're great to reach out to. But I have worked in IT for over 20 years. So I understand, these topics, and we're presenting these through that lens. If while I'm going through this, you have questions, hopefully we can get those answered. So put those in chat. Hopefully somebody's watching that because I can't see that at the moment. And will be able to cue me if there are questions that I need to answer. But I don't mind being interrupted. But today, what I'm going to run through is first talking about what Realty and SOGI is, especially as it relates to health equity in our agencies. Going to talk about some impacts on project management. Going to cover a little bit about the portfolio of projects that my team works on, and how there are some other projects which will include Realty and SOGI and the effects there, and how Realty and SOGI might affect your project or just project management in general. So as was mentioned, Realty SOGI is an acronym for race, ethnicity, and language and disability. It was originally real, and then they added disability, so it became Realty. And then SOGI is sexual orientation and gender identity. There are two major bills that were enacted to both establish these standards and then enforce or require the collection of that data. The first was 2134, which was proposed and passed about 10 years ago in 2013. And that kind of set up the Realty SOGI data standards and collection and required us to set up those standards. There was a lot of community involvement in those bills. The Asian Pacific American Network of Oregon and the Oregon Health Equity Alliance are two of those major organizations that really work to push the passage of those and bring about those standards so that they can start looking at demographics in a much more granular way and how health equity and services are affected by that. And then most recently in 2021, that HB 3159 requires providers and insurers to submit Realty and SOGI data to the Oregon Health Authority annually. And that's where a lot of these portfolio projects that I'm working on come out of that bill. There are a couple of other bills, I won't name them specifically, but they really go into the effects of protecting people when this data is submitted, making sure that it's not used to harm them in any way. So there's a lot of other legislative work around this. When we talk about race and ethnicity, the reason we combine those is because we've tried to expand it into more looking at different communities and cultures throughout our state. And so we have about 140 different options for race and ethnicity, expanding from the original 6 or 10 that you might see on forms in the past, really allowing us to take a much more granular look at different communities within our state and then different effects of services being supplied and then health effects on those communities. We expanded language to about 7,000 different languages, which far exceeds the amount that's actually spoken of in the United States. You'll find very few places that speak that many languages in a single area. Disability, we focus not on the diagnosis, not on a medical diagnosis, but on the level of ability and how someone is impacted by it. So the questions that we have around disability very much go into how does that affect you? What does that do in terms of your daily life? And really try to capture that in order to make determinations about how that might affect their health and the services they receive. And then sexual orientation and gender identity, we've greatly expanded those topics and are continuing to expand those as we have different discussions with different community groups and try to make sure to be very inclusive. The key goal here is that everyone is represented, that when they go in and look at Realty SOGI information, they're able to find where they belong. They're able to find that appropriate option for them, and they don't have to guess where they fall. It's very clear for them, and they can choose the appropriate classification for them. And it helps us in looking at the data and looking at those different demographics. Now, the COVID pandemic really increased the urgency and created some opportunities for getting this data. We worked with the vaccine providers and really we're able to get a lot more collection of data through that and add those options to forms when people were getting vaccines and applying for testing and other things around the COVID pandemic. So it really was a boost to this effort and gave us a big push, allowed us to get where we are today. So let's talk a little bit more about Realty and SOGI and how it falls into OHA's goal of eliminating health equities. First, let's talk about health. What is it? It's not a one size fits all. Health is different for everyone. Whether you're old or young, you're going to define health in a very different way. I guarantee if a 20-year-old woke up with the kind of pain I have in the morning, they would probably consider themselves in an emergency situation and be rushing off to the doctor. I just take an aspirin and go about my day. So it really does capture different things for different people, and how we define it, how we look at how we're going to define whether we're actually making improvements in health. Is it longevity? Is it a person's capabilities or disabilities? Is it their access to care? Common things like infant mortality, those things that we can measure really help us. So looking at those disease rates, looking at a level of physical activity are some of the ways that we try to determine health. But we're also going to look at things like the services around health. So do you have access to care? What's your costs for different levels of access? And what are the outcomes that you're seeing from those services that you might be receiving? So really trying to get at that. One of the major efforts is looking at whether there are an appropriate number of interpreters in a specific area for the different languages spoken there, because that language barrier can be an additional barrier to people receiving health care and following through on their health care. Being able to understand the directions that are given to you is very important in making sure that you get the care that you receive, care that you deserve. One of the other concepts that the Equity and Inclusion Division of OHA is very much kind of shepherding is data justice. And data justice is about supporting communities through data to elevate their voice, to really make sure we're capturing their experience in the healthcare system, capture the inequities they've experienced in their voice. It isn't about just collecting the data and telling them what's best for them, but about capturing what they're seeing. So it's moving beyond just equity, but looking for where they see solutions, where the barriers that they're experiencing can be broken down. And so that's listening to them and giving them the data that elevates, their voice so they can share it with the rest of Oregon, with their healthcare providers, and with others so that change can be made and we can really see some true improvements in health inequities. So representation in the data is very important for that. If we can't find people or communities in the data, it's very hard to represent them. It's very hard to give them a voice. So by expanding Realty and SOGI, we're actually representing them in the data so we can see them. As project managers, you've all heard the Drucker quote, what gets measured gets improved. If we can't measure it, we can't see it. And so that representation is critical to making improvements in the healthcare that's delivered and improvements in the level of health equity that we see in our communities. Now, when it comes to equality and equity, you've probably seen similar diagrams to what's being shown out there. We're still learning, we're still expanding our definitions here, and we're still trying to understand this topic. And I see that a hand raised. Amy, is there a question I should answer?
Yes. I had a question regarding the reflected in data. Does that mean that you added more fields and choices in your computer system to determine or identify these folks? Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you.
we've greatly expanded, that race, ethnicity categories, sexual orientation, gender identity, language, so that we can help identify individuals. And, that's going to be a continual effort, because when we look backwards, it's very hard to see that because we didn't have those options in selection. So by the more data we collect now and are able to make connections back to the data we've previously connected, we're going to be able to make better decisions because we're going to have that longitudinal look at how the data has changed and how services have been changing and health has been changing over time.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome. So health equity, it's more than just equality. When we look at these diagrams, we can see lots of different evidence of equality where people are given the same things. Look at the bicycle, everybody's given the same bicycle. That doesn't get them anywhere. That doesn't get them to what they need in order to feel equity. So in one instance, it's a powered wheelchair. In another instance, it's a smaller, more off-road bike. But that just goes to show that there's a difference between equality, giving everyone the same thing, and equity, which is establishing that everybody gets what they need. And that's what it's really about, is establish that equity so that we're finding the right solutions for the right individuals. And it's not about just giving everybody access. It's about giving the right level of access to the different people. The diagram on the bottom shows the multiple ways that we need to adjust something like a crosswalk in order to accommodate those who are in a wheelchair, those who might be blind, or those who are deaf, and make sure that they can all cross safely. That's a big part of this, is finding solutions that address the problems for people. But in order to do that, we must first hear what those problems are directly from the people. We need to be listening to how people need those problems addressed, and not assume, especially as the government, which Oregon Health Authority is, not assume that we know what's best for them, but to really hear what they believe they need so we can address those needs. If you focus on changing the person to fit a standard, doing something like giving sight to a blind person, you might miss the actual need. There have been studies done where someone who has been blind or deaf for the majority of their life was given the ability to see or hear through some technology. And they had a great amount of struggle and difficulty in adapting to that new reality. For many, as we age, our brains become very set. We're not laying down a lot of new neurons at my age. And once it's developed, it becomes a lot harder to adapt. And so if you're introducing a change to try and make somebody fit a standard, that level of adaptation that's required is a significant challenge to overcome. So we need to be considerate of the individual, where they're at, and address the solutions to what they need, not make them fit a standard or make them fit what we think they need. You've all probably encountered a grocery store. Walk into a grocery store, look at the shelves, look at the aisles. What do you see? You see a very high level of disparity in where products are at. Now, most of that is due to money. People, product owners, companies pay a significant amount of money to have their products placed at what they consider the bell curve, the higher bell curve for people's height and where their vision is. That's where they spend their money. That's where they position their products. But if you can't reach that high, or maybe not reach that low, I know some of us, especially at my age, have trouble bending down really low and getting some of those things on the bottom shelf. It makes it difficult, and it creates a level of disparity. Why aren't grocery store shelves designed vertically so that products are arranged in a vertical fashion, meaning one product in each vertical slice, and thus selection can be made at whatever height you can reach. If you've ever tried to go around a grocery store in a wheelchair, it's very difficult to reach a lot of things. So we need to think about meeting people where they're at and not trying to fit them to a standard or to an average. And that's where we get to equity, not just equality. So why does this matter for project management? Well, there's a couple of different concepts that I'm going to run through here that I think are really important for project managers and projects in general to understand and think about. The first, embracing diversity. When you do that in your project teams, you foster innovation and creativity. When project managers prioritize Realty and SOGI in their hiring, in their stakeholder engagements, in just the work that they do on their projects, they create an inclusive environment where individuals from various backgrounds feel valued, and it leads to a richer pool of ideas and perspectives. Legal and ethical compliance is an important thing that we need to be addressing, especially if you're working in government. You know, the US and Oregon have laws and regulations in place that protect individuals from discrimination, especially based on Realty and SOGI factors. So you must ensure that your projects comply with these laws so you avoid the legal repercussions, and you adhere to those ethical principles of fairness and respect in your project work. When you're hiring, you know, it's really great to put forth a inclusive attitude in your postings, making sure to communicate you're looking for diverse candidates, you're looking for individuals from all stripes, from all backgrounds, from all lived experiences. You know, we depend on talented and diverse workforce to deliver successful projects. And by promoting inclusion, especially Realty SOGI inclusion, you can attract a wider range of candidates, retain top talent, improve employee morale and satisfaction. You know, a diverse team is much more likely to stay engaged and committed to those project goals. Diverse teams bring different perspectives to the table. That leads to more robust problem solving and decision making. The diversity for a team focused on inclusion really helps project managers identify and address potential issues from a broader range of angles, leading to more effective project outcomes. You also want to think about stakeholder relations and how a diverse team affects your ability to represent your organization, represent those you're trying to serve, clients, customers, and the public. So demonstrating commitment to Realty and SOGI issues through your hiring, through your team makeup, can enhance an organization's reputation and relationships with stakeholders who value diversity and inclusion. And it can also help mitigate reputational risks associated with discrimination and inclusion. So really focus on that in your hiring, in your team building, and in your communications. So from my experience in project management, there's a couple of things that I would call out that I've encountered that really have been a big part of why I wanted to do this work and some of the different perspectives I think I can bring to this. The first one, forms and missed opportunities. If you've ever done a technology project, especially over the last 20 years, you've probably been asked by a user or by a business partner to take a form, something that's got, you know, specific fields that people are supposed to enter, usually with, you know, writing things down, and turn that into a web application, turn that into something where somebody can enter the information online. And I've had it happen to me many times where they're like, don't change it, just the form, just the way it is. And that always leaves me with a bad feeling because that's, again, the way we've always done it doesn't really embrace inclusion and progress. And so those past projects where we just recreate a paper form on the web locks us into the limitations of the form, locks us into those selections that were determined many years ago. I've had forms handed to me that were 30 years old, and we don't collect data in that way anymore. And we allow for a much broader range of things, you know, especially sexual orientation, gender identity, race, ethnicity. So just recreating a form online is really a huge missed opportunity and something that would really, you know, suggest pushing back on. I'm sure most of you do that. Rules and constraints are another area that I want to, you know, call out. Every time we create an unchangeable rule or constraint, we bind the future to the ignorance of the present. And what that means is if we create a rule like if you're male, the pregnancy option doesn't show up anymore. All of a sudden, we've bound the future, whoever uses that web application in the future, to that rule, to that ignorance of the present, which is something, you know, from personal experience I did many, many years ago. And it binds the future to that ignorance. So we're limiting the choices available. And so rules and constraints should periodically be reevaluated, challenged, and changed as necessary. We as a community, as a population, as an individuals are still learning, growing, and progressing. And our computer systems need to be reflecting this. And so be careful whenever you're putting a rule or constraint into a project, into requirements, that it's open to change, that it's open to being reconsidered in the future. And that gets us into future proofing, recognizing that we did things in the past that were limiting and we changed them. And there will be changes in the future. Just because it's the way we do it today doesn't mean it's the way we should do it in the future. The race ethnicities we have today might grow and change. The sexual orientation, gender identity will grow and change. And so we need to be cognizant of that. We need to be aware of that. We need to lock ourselves into that. You know, most of the applications from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, there were 2 to 3 options for gender, 6 to 10 for race. They locked us into those. And so what that does is when we look back at that data, we're limited there unless we can tie it to a person today and reevaluate that gender and race and fill in new values for there. We're locked into that. So it's important when you're doing any kind of project that collects data to retain the context under which it was created. When data is stored, it needs to include metadata that supplies the context. So if you only had male and female as a gender, somewhere in there, it needs to collect that context that those were the only 2 options. And so that when a future generation goes in and looks at that data, they understand they did not have the option to select anything else. And so that data needs to be evaluated with that context, with that lens, to understand it's not that there weren't people who fell outside of that typical gender standards, but that they weren't allowed to select for themselves. So make sure you're future proofing, make sure you're thinking forward on those options, on those things you do. New technology. Well, new doesn't always mean better, and it doesn't always mean that it's without the bias of the past. One of these things we've learned about Gen AI is that it's being built using existing collections of documents, images, algorithms, etc., that are connected to the past. Some of the facial recognition software was connected to data image collection that goes back many, many decades. And a lot of the images that were used were from not the greatest sources. I won't go into the whole history of it, but what it did was perpetuate systemic racism through the images that were selected to represent different emotions, to represent different facial structures. And so by building Gen AI on the existing collection of documents and images that were available, they built in systemic racism into those systems. And so we've constantly got to be screening for that. We've got to look at new implementations that need to be screened for bias because the use cases that we have need to reflect the diversity of the population. And we need to have testers that are equally diverse so we don't run into situations where technology works for one person but not another because that bias was built into that system. So be careful of the new technology. A lot of it's great, you know, AI, there's a lot of great uses for it. I use it myself with ChatGPT a lot. But be aware of its bias, be aware of its limitations, be aware that it was built by people and inherently people do have biases. None of us are free of that. So my team, the Health and Service Equity Transformation, I know it's a terrible acronym, HSET. We've thought about changing it, but nothing's really stuck. We have a portfolio of projects, and these are just the current ones that I'm listing here of the projects that we're doing. So the first one is the initial repository. That's where we're storing the data. It's currently an on-premise data store at the state data center. We're moving that over into the cloud. It's going to be focused on collecting the data, doing the analysis, reporting, the work that statisticians, data scientists do on it to make the data, not make the data, but conform the data to represent the society. So there are different algorithms and other things they use to do that. And by having it in this repository, they're able to do that work. They also use tools like Power BI and Tableau so that they can do reporting out of this data and really inform our agency, inform communities, and share that information based on the demographics that we have, combining it with the health data so that it can really produce outcomes, produce some good outcomes for us. So that's where all the data is stored, is in that initial repository, and we're working on moving that to the cloud currently. We have what's called a patient-facing survey tool. This is an individual web application that collects the data, so allows users to enter their RealD and SOGI data. We're looking at our future options with this. Currently, it's somewhat limited. We're looking at expanding this, possibly doing a mobile application, really getting to where we're meeting people where they're at and addressing some of those data equity issues, because most people aren't using laptops as much anymore. They're on their phones and devices. So we're looking at how we get to connect with people there. And that's where that patient-facing survey tool comes in. And we're also going to be building a centralized registry that'll be a lot of the interface to the data. So allow us more collection of data from other sources, large health agencies, through electronic health records, possibly through HL7 and their newest FHIR, FHIR API, and possibly developing some other APIs as well that collect data from those health insurers, providers, and from other parts of our agency, so we can really bring this data together, because just having RealD and SOGI data alone doesn't tell us where the health inequities are. We've got to combine it with the health outcomes we're seeing, the services that are provided, where people are getting care. Connecting all the dots there is really what's going to tell us where there's areas to improve, where health equities need to be addressed, and give that data back out to the communities so that they can do things like conduct their own analysis, identify the solutions or approaches to the problems that they're seeing. So really, that's what it's all about, is getting this data back to those who need it to tell their stories. We've done a lot of work on looking at this RealD and SOGI implementation and aligning it to our IT strategic plan. OIS is an acronym here that stands for the Office of Information Services, which is the IT group within the Oregon Health Authority. And we have a strategic plan, and what we're doing is aligning what we're doing with RealD SOGI to that strategic plan, part of which is creating and implementing a framework for data governance. You can imagine trying to align all these different systems. We're very siloed, like most large state agencies. And what we're trying to do is align that RealD SOGI data collection throughout our agency. And data governance is a big part of that, because we can't have one group collecting RealD and SOGI one way and another collecting another way. We need to have it collected in a very standardized way so that we can bring it together in that central repository and have it have meaning. We're also working on enterprise integration strategies so that the processes and tools we use to collect the data, to analyze the data, to share the data, everything from person matching to reporting gets interoperable throughout our agency. So it's a big push that we're doing. And then we're trying to create an enterprise data strategy. We have some efforts going on within each of the agencies with our new CDO and ODHS, and with our data representation within OHA, to really work on data strategy, work on data literacy, and the whole of data management throughout our organization, so that this data is integrated throughout our systems, can be shared, and utilized more effectively. That's a big part of aligning to that strategy. So as I mentioned, data collection is insufficient without context, without connection. Racism, prejudice, these have detrimental effects on health. And we've seen this, we've seen the data for it. When you look at, just one specific measure, women who are Black and pregnant have over twice the infant mortality rate of women who are white in the US. And they've done some data analysis on the pregnant women who are Black and the pregnant women who are white and others in the US and checked their stress levels. And what they found is that pregnant women who are Black in the US have stress hormone levels equivalent to pregnant women who are serving in active duty military deployments. Let me say that again. The stress hormone level of Black women who are pregnant in the US is equivalent to pregnant women who are deployed in active military environments. They're saying that might be a huge connection to why the infant mortality rate is twice as high in that population. And so there's a connection there that they're trying to discern out and see what they can do. Obviously, there's a lot of reasons for those stress hormone levels: segregated neighborhoods, limited opportunities, social pressures, the overt racism that some experience. All can lead to that and lead to that health risk for newborns. And it isn't just reflected in infant mortality. Those stress hormones lead to low birth rate, lead to other long-term health risks and indicators throughout a person's life. So if a pregnant woman has high stress hormone levels and gives birth, those affect the continuing development of that child through infancy into adulthood and can lead to health problems for the rest of their life. So we have an indicator here. We've got to do things about it. And we've got to make those connections. But this is just one example of where having the data, being able to make the connections, can tell us a lot about where we can address things, where we can look for solutions, where we can talk to and give data back to the community so they can tell us, how do we address this? How do we reduce the stress levels of these pregnant mothers? You know, how can we address the problems that they're experiencing so that we can not only affect that generation, but the next generation and their health throughout their lives? So just one simple example of, you know, where this data comes into play. And the equity inclusion division, I have Office of Equity Inclusion on the slide, but they've actually changed it to the equity inclusion division. They are leading the Oregon Health Authority's efforts to identify and address these issues. And if you have any questions specifically about equity and inclusion and how it's being led at the Oregon Health Authority, I implore you to reach out to them. They're experts on this subject, and they have a very large number of very passionate, intelligent people over there that are really working hard to implement this program and help address health inequities throughout the state. So with that, thank you very much for your time. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take those now.
Thank you, Brian. I'm looking to see if we have anything in the chat. And I don't see that we have any hands up at this point. I was just
Is
going
everybody
to
still awake?
Yes, I was just going to share the Department of Justice Division of Child Support. We're looking at our child support guidelines, what we base child support orders on. And in that process, in that project, we issued a survey and folks responded with their race, ethnicity, where they live, that type of thing. And we're really looking at getting folks with lived experience to provide input on this project so we can get a more diverse response and really design for the user, not just our internal folks. So I see that. Alan, did you have a question?
I did, and maybe more esoteric. You really had me thinking about in terms of African American women having so much stress during pregnancy, and it made me think of, in the workplace, what can we do to help reduce that stress? And I'm sure it's true for a lot of folks, but especially true for them. So, what do you have any recommendations?
As I said, I'm not an expert on solving these problems. I am a doctor, so I could probably come up with some personal things out of my health knowledge. I think the biggest thing you can do for any population is be inclusive, be accepting, give people the space to share their stories, to be themselves. You know, I've been lucky enough to work in an organization where it is very inclusive. I've been able to hire an amazing team of people to work with me, who represent a lot of different lived experiences, and giving them space to be themselves, to present their ideas, to share their knowledge, is extremely important. My wife works in IT as well. She works in private industry, and she's told me all the horror stories about being a woman in IT, and especially around engineers, and not being heard. And I could see the stress it causes her. So make sure their voices are heard. Make sure they're able to represent themselves and feel accepted in your organization and in your teams.
I'm in no way comparing myself to an African American woman, but when I was pregnant, our agency had a restroom, a room where you could go in and sleep. So during breaks and lunches, I use that quite a bit, just making sure that they understand that they're welcome to use it and it's not anything to be judged upon. That's just one thing I would share. Uh-oh. Are we frozen? Okay.
Nope.
I see that Dale has his hand up.
Good afternoon, Bryant. So when the Department of Human Services or your agency captures participant data, including differences in gender and race and how they identify themselves, and you have data interfaces with partner agencies such as the Division of Child Support, the Child Welfare Program, the Department of Revenue, and how do you transfer data between programs when this agency does not capture that participant data, this agency does. So they're not transmitting that to you with the proper gender and identity roles, and you are transmitting data to them with extra data that they're not expecting. How do you reconcile that?
So we're still in the infancy of doing a lot of this work, and because of that, we're still in a trust building with the communities, with the individuals in our state. And so we have not developed the partnerships and the ability to share this data out broadly with other state agencies, because we are in that space, and we're trying to make sure the communities and those who give us this data and supply this data freely to us know that their data is protected, know that it's going to remain secure. And there are legitimate concerns in the community about some of this data being shared, about people being targeted. Political elections change laws, change policy. And so there are people with legitimate concerns that if they share this data with the government, that it's going to get shared too freely or too broadly within the government, and it could expose them to negative repercussions. And so we're slowly building this. Right now, we're limiting it to the Oregon Health Authority and Department of Human Services until we can build the trust and make sure we're providing the right level of protections and security for those individuals. I think, one of the things that we're struggling with and trying to address is that trust building and working on ways in which, as we request this data from individuals, we don't disempower them, but we empower them and enable them by giving us this data. It's a fine line to walk when you're a government trying to do this work, but we're trying to look at methods by which we can do that. And so best answer I have right now is we're still in its infancy. We're still learning. I think those opportunities will come in the future, but they don't exist right now.
Thank you.
I did see your hand up, Alan, but there is a question in the chat. I wanted
Oh yes,
to
that's what I was
address
going to
first.
reference.
Oh, go for it.
Okay.
There was
So
a question
the question
from
was
Katie and the question disappeared. I just want to make sure that was her question answered in your discussion, or did it just disappear on my screen?
I deleted it because I wanted to talk to my manager about it. Thanks, though.
Okay.
Katie, if you're looking for standards on Realty and SOGI,
I was looking about engagement within OHA.
Okay.
That's all it was. You're good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Feel free to reach out to me and my team. We'll be happy to talk with you more about it.
Wonderful. Thanks.
There was another question in the chat. Do we have data on the mortality rates of children born or lost to the active duty women? I do not have that data. I'm sure it's gathered somewhere. I read some stuff on it, but I don't have that data now. Thank you for the question.
I think I thought that really illustrated, yes, just how stressful it can be for women of color to be pregnant and go through those concerns. I also wanted to share that the illustration with the bicycle is a very good illustration. I found that to be very helpful.
There's been a lot of concern over that one illustration of the fence because, you know, it didn't really capture what a lot of people were trying to communicate in terms of equity and inclusion because it was all able-bodied people. So I think that diagram, the diagram with the crosswalk, you know, I was looking for representation, and that's why I chose at least 3 different diagrams because I really wanted to make sure there was good representation.
Great, thank you. Anything else for the good of the order before I go into my closing spiel?
Just one question, if I may.
Go right ahead.
Yes, my name is Pamela Kreitz. I work at the data center, and I was just wondering, as a woman of color working in an unusual job, I work in STEM work and information technology. I was just wondering, for people that are willing in different diverse communities, are communities of different communities being asked if they would allow their data, if it's scrubbed, to be shared with different organizations for maturity in data science?
The Equity and Inclusion Division is meeting with different community groups throughout the state, representing the different populations, both race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and disabled communities to understand their concerns and understand how they would find it best to utilize this data. So they're bridging that gap and they're having those discussions and collecting that information. And when they come to more conclusions and want us to work more on that, you know, I'm on the AT side, so we will be engaging with them on their requests. But as of yet, security and protection of the data has been a big concern.
Tiffany has her hand up.
I was just gonna say that another interesting aspect of this work that's been shown internally at OHA is kind of the structure of the, and I don't, know how much, Bryant could share or would share in a public gathering like this, but the repository and how, the information is captured, and how information can like trickle forward or trickle backwards depending on the onset of the instance or whatever it is that the variable that is flagged. So there is kind of another interesting aspect of this project that gets more into the nitty-gritty details of implementation of the information. So just kind of wanted to throw that out there that maybe if people are interested, we could, kind of continue this conversation later and talk about that as well.
Yeah, they've already started producing reports with this data, and so the Oregon Health Authority has produced some reports that you can find publicly available that display this data and some of the different things that they found around health equities and inequities in the population.
Okay, thank you. Laureen?
Hi, yes. First of all, thank you. Amazing presentation.
Thank you.
And yeah, I don't know if you're able to go into these details, but I had two questions. One about requesting the deletion of the data once it's provided by a client, and the second about commingling, meaning when I apply, let's say for benefits, whether it's child welfare or Medicare or some form of medical, is the SOGI RealG data I provide commingled with those applications of services? And if not, how did you make those decisions?
So yes, we're still expanding the collection of Realty and SOGI through the organization. So many of the, like the Oregon Health Plan, Medicare, and other forms are collecting that data, or other applications are collecting that data. But we're still expanding that and increasing that throughout the agency. So you'll see that more and more in different applications that we have. As to your first question, that goes right into building trust. When you look at something like GDPR, which is the European privacy standard, and some of the state standards that have started to be passed in the US, there are requirements on people being able to delete data. Now, some of that applies more to private industry than to government, so we'll see how all that shakes out. But I do feel personally, and from an IT perspective, that it's an important aspect of trust to empower those that we're asking to give us their data, so they can, one, decide when they want to submit it, two, decide where it goes, how it will be utilized, three, change it when they feel it's necessary, because this data, especially in the sexual orientation, gender identity fields, can change over time. And four, that right to delete, that right to say, I'm not comfortable with the government having my data anymore. Maybe it's a change in governor, maybe it's a change in politics in general in the US, but there are legitimate reasons why people would want their data to be removed from a system. And personally, I believe we should be empowering individuals to do that. We aren't there yet with this system, and I don't know if we'll get there, but we're considering that. We're looking into that, because I think that is an important thing in building trust with individuals and with communities.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, no other hands up, no other questions in the chat. I'll go ahead and start with closing the meeting. And let me go. So we hope that you enjoyed this presentation. Thank you for attending, and thank you so much, Bryant, for presenting. I will provide a link after the meeting to a survey. And in that survey, you can help us improve future PMUG experiences and nominate yourself or a colleague for as a future speaker. You can also look for a follow-up email with links to resources. And please share this with your team members and those who may not be on the PMUG listserv to reach out to chro.training@das.or.us to be added to the PMUG listserv. Again, if you're interested in learning more about business analyst processes, also visit the BANG website. And thank you, Tiffany, for sharing the BANG website in the chat, the OPMAB website in the chat, as well as the PMUG website in the chat. Thank you so much. And enjoy the rest of your week. We will see you again in January.
Hey, Amy, did you want to do a call out for that one topic that you potentially wanted presenters on?
Oh, also, I will go ahead and send this in my follow-up email, but if anyone is interested or knows of anyone who might be a resource to present on benefits realization management, that is a topic we're researching and would like to get someone to speak to a future PMUG for that. So, thank you. Thanks, Tiffany, and I will go ahead and include that in my follow-up email as well. Okay, we'll go ahead and end the meeting now.